Welcome to Echoes of the Unknown, the podcast where we'll be exploring some of the world's most fascinating unsolved mysteries. I'm Jack Montgomery, and today we're traveling back to Christmas Eve 1945, where we'll investigate the baffling disappearance of 5 children in Fayetteville, West Virginia. What started out as a festive holiday evening for the Sodder family was transformed into an inexplicable tragedy that would haunt generations and become one of the most discussed unsolved cases in American history. This story begins in 1895, when George Sodder was born with the name Giorgio Soddu in Sardinia, Italy. He immigrated to the United States 13 years later and found work on the railroads in Pennsylvania, carrying water and other supplies to workers. After a few years, he took more permanent work as a driver in Smithers, West Virginia, and eventually started his own trucking company. Jenny Cipriani, a storekeeper's daughter who had also emigrated from Italy in her childhood, married George in 1922. The Sodders settled outside nearby Fayetteville, which at the time had a large population of Italian immigrants. They lived in a 2-story wood frame house 2 miles north of town. In 1923, they had the first of their 10 children. George's business prospered, and in the words of one local official, they became one of the most respected middle-class families around. However, George had strong opinions about many subjects, and he was not shy about expressing them, which sometimes alienated people. In particular, his strident opposition to Italian dictator Benito Mussolini had led to heated arguments with some other members of the immigrant community. The last of their children, Sylvia, was born in 1942. By then, their second oldest son, Joe, had left home at the age of 17 to serve in the military during World War II. The following year, Mussolini was deposed and executed. However, George's criticism of the late dictator had left some hard feelings. In one example, in October 1945, a visiting life insurance salesman warned George, after he refused to buy a policy, that his house would go up in smoke. The salesman further warned that George's children are going to be destroyed, all because of what he said were dirty remarks George had been making about Mussolini. Another visitor to the Sodder home, ostensibly seeking work, took the occasion to go around to the back and warn George that a pair of fuse boxes would cause a fire someday. George was puzzled by this, since he had recently had the house rewired when an electric stove was installed, and the local electric company had told him afterwards it was safe. Furthermore, in the weeks before Christmas that year, George's older sons had noticed a strange car parked along the main highway through town. They said its occupants were watching the younger Sodder children as they returned from school. On Christmas Eve in 1945, the Sodder family was celebrating the holiday in their home. Their oldest daughter, 17-year-old Marion, had been working at a dime store in downtown Fayetteville, and she surprised 3 of her younger sisters with new toys she had bought for them as Christmas gifts. Martha, 12, Jenny, 8, and Betty, 5. The girls were so excited they asked their mother if they could stay up past their usual bedtime. At around 10 p.m., Jenny told them they could stay up a little later as long as the 2 oldest boys who were still awake, 14-year-old Morris and his 9-year-old brother Louis, remembered to put the cows in and feed the chickens before going to bed themselves. George and the 2 oldest boys, John, 23, and George Jr., 16, who had spent the day working with their father, had already fallen asleep. After reminding the younger boys to do those remaining chores, Jenny took 3-year-old Sylvia upstairs with her, and they went to bed together. At around 12:30 a.m., the telephone rang. Jenny woke up and went downstairs to answer it. The caller was a woman whose voice she did not recognize. asking for someone she was not familiar with the sound of laughter and clinking glasses in the background. Jenny told the caller she had reached the wrong number, later recalling the woman's weird laugh. She hung up, and as she headed back to bed, she noticed that the lights were still on downstairs and the curtains were not drawn. That was unusual, since those were two things the children normally attended to when they stayed up later than their parents. Marion had fallen asleep on the living room couch, so Jenny assumed the other children who had stayed up later had gone back up to the attic where they slept. So she closed the curtains, turned out the lights, and returned to bed. At 1 a.m., Jenny was awakened again by the sound of an object hitting the house's roof with a loud bang, then a rolling noise. After hearing nothing further, she went back to sleep. After another half hour, she woke up again, this time smelling smoke. When she got up, she found that the room George used for his office was on fire around the telephone line and fuse box. Jenny woke him, and he in turn woke their older sons. Both parents and four of their children, Marion, Sylvia, John, and George Jr., escaped the house. They frantically yelled to the children upstairs but heard no response. They could not go up there since the stairway itself was already in flames. Tragically, their 5 other kids remained trapped on the second floor. George attempted to climb the house's outside wall and broke open a window, cutting his arm in the process. He and his sons intended to use a ladder to reach the attic in an effort to rescue the other children, but it was not in its usual spot, resting against the side of the house, and could not be found nearby. George then tried to pull both of the trucks he used in his business up to the house to use them to climb to the attic window, but neither of them would start, even though they had both worked perfectly the day before. These coincidences would later fuel theories about premeditation and foul play. Frustrated, the 6 Sodder family members who had escaped had no choice but to watch their house burn down and collapse over the next 45 minutes. They initially assumed the other 5 children had perished in the blaze. The fire department, low on manpower due to the war and relying on individual firefighters to call each other, did not respond until later that same morning. Chief F.J. Morris said the next day that the already slow response was further hampered by his inability to drive the fire truck, requiring that he wait until someone who could drive was available. When they finally arrived, the firefighters, one of whom was a brother of Jenny's, could do little more than look through the ashes that were left in the Sodders' basement. By 10 a.m., Chief Morris told the Sodders that they had not found any bones, as might have been expected if the other children had been in the house as it burned. He later claimed the heat was so intense that the fire had completely cremated the children's bodies. Chief Morris told George to leave the site undisturbed so that the state fire marshal's office could conduct a more thorough investigation. However, after 4 days, George and his wife could not bear to look at it anymore, so he bulldozed 5 feet of dirt over the site with the intention of converting it to a memorial garden for their lost children. The local coroner convened an inquest the next day, which determined that the fire was an accident caused by faulty wiring. Not long afterward, as they began to rebuild their lives, the Sodder family began to question the official findings about the fire. They wondered why, if it had been caused by an electrical problem, the family's Christmas lights had remained on throughout the fire's early stages, when the power should have gone out. Then they found the ladder that had been missing from the side of the house at the bottom of an embankment 75 feet away, which suggested deliberate tampering. A telephone repairman told the Sodders that the house's phone line had not been burned through in the fire, as they had initially thought. Instead, it had been cut by someone who had been willing and able to climb 14 feet up the pole and reach 2 feet away from it to do so. A man who neighbors had seen stealing a block and tackle from the property around the time of the fire was identified and arrested. He admitted to the theft and claimed he had been the one who cut the phone line, thinking it was a power line. However, he denied having anything to do with the fire. Unfortunately, no record exists that identifies the suspect, and no explanation was ever given for why he would have wanted to cut any utility lines to the Sodder house while stealing the block and tackle. Jenny also had trouble accepting Chief Morris's belief that all traces of the children's bodies had been burned completely in the fire. Many of the household appliances had been found in the ashes, still recognizable, along with fragments of the tin roof. She contrasted the results of the fire with a newspaper account she read of a similar house fire around the same time, which killed a family of 7. In that case, skeletal remains of all the victims were reportedly found. An employee of a local crematorium she contacted told her that human bones remain even after bodies are burned at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 hours, which was far longer and hotter than the house fire could have been. Jenny even conducted her own experiments by burning small piles of animal bones, and they never completely disintegrated. The failure of the Sodder's trucks to start was also considered. George believed they had been tampered with, perhaps by the same man who stole the block and tackle and cut the phone line. However, one of George's sons-in-law told a local newspaper that he had eventually come to believe that, in their desperate haste to start the trucks, George and his sons might have inadvertently flooded the engines. Some accounts have suggested that the wrong number phone call to their house might have also somehow been connected to the fire. However, investigators later located the woman who had made the call, and she confirmed it had been a wrong number on her part. As spring approached, the Sodders, as they had said they would, planted flowers in the soil that was bulldozed over the house. Jenny tended it carefully for the rest of her life. However, further developments in early 1946 reinforced the family's belief that the children they were memorializing might, in fact, be alive somewhere. Evidence emerged indicating that the fire had not started in an electrical fault and was instead set deliberately. The driver of a bus that passed through Fayetteville late Christmas Eve said he had seen some people throwing balls of fire at the Sodder's house. A few months later, when the snow had melted, Sylvia found a small, hard, dark green, rubber ball-like object in the brush nearby. George, recalling his wife's account of a loud thump on the roof before the fire, said it looked like a pineapple bomb hand grenade or some other incendiary device used in combat. The family later claimed that, contrary to the fire marshal's conclusion, the fire had started on the roof, although by then there was no way to prove it. Most disturbingly, multiple witnesses came forward with reported sightings of the children after the fire. One woman who had been watching the fire from the road said she had seen some of them peering out of a passing car while the house was burning. Another woman at a tourist stop claimed to have seen them in a car the morning after the fire. A waitress at a rest stop between Fayetteville and Charleston said she had served them breakfast the next morning, saying they were accompanied by 2 adults who refused to speak. She also noted the presence of a car with Florida license plates in the parking lot. Yet another witness described seeing the children with what she described as Italian-looking men in a hotel weeks later. While none of these sightings were ever confirmed by police, they added layers of complexity to an already mysterious case. The Sodders hired a private investigator named C.C. Tinsley from the nearby town of Golly Bridge to look into the case. Tinsley informed the family that the insurance salesman who had threatened George over his anti-Mussolini sentiments had been a member of the coroner's jury that ruled the fire an accident. In August 1949, George was able to persuade Oscar Hunter, a Washington, D.C. pathologist, to supervise a new search through the dirt at the house site. After a very thorough search, artifacts including a dictionary that had belonged to the children and some coins were found. Several small bone fragments were also unearthed, and they were determined to have been human vertebrae. The bone fragments were sent to Marshall Newman, a specialist at the Smithsonian Institution. He confirmed them to be lumbar vertebrae, all from the same person. According to Newman's written report, his detailed examination of the fusion of the vertebrae led him to conclude that the age of the individual at death should have been at least 16 or 17 years, with a top age limit of about 22. Thus, given this age range, it was unlikely that these bones were from any of the 5 missing children. After all, the oldest child, Morris, had been only 14 at the time. Still, the report did state that vertebrae of a boy his age sometimes were advanced enough to appear to be at the lower end of the range. Newman added that the bones showed no sign of exposure to flame. Furthermore, he agreed it was very strange that those bones were the only ones found, since a wood fire of such short duration should have left full skeletons of all of the children behind. The report concluded that the vertebrae had instead most likely come from the dirt that George had used to bulldoze the site. Later, Tinsley supposedly confirmed that the bone fragments had come from a cemetery in nearby Mount Hope, but he could not explain why they had been taken from there or how they came to be at the fire site. Perhaps the most startling development came in 1967, over 20 years after the fire, when Jenny received an anonymous letter. Postmarked from Kentucky with no return address, it contained a photograph. The image showed a young man in his 20s who bore a striking resemblance to what Louis Sodder might have looked like as an adult, and the family believed it was him. An enigmatic message on the back of the photo, written in a shaky hand, read, "Louis Sodder, I love Brother Frankie, L.L.I.L., boys, A 90132 or 35. The reference to Frankie has always been a mystery, since there was no known brother by that name. This led some to speculate it could have been a nickname or the name of a friend. Equally mysterious was the cryptic alphanumeric code at the end of the message. Although that code has never been definitively explained, some have speculated that it could be a prisoner identification number, especially since it follows a format similar to those used by correctional institutions. The Sodders hired a private investigator to go to Kentucky to investigate this lead, but he never reported back and then disappeared without a trace. George and Jenny never accepted the official explanation and dedicated the rest of their lives to uncovering the truth. They never wavered in their belief that it was a case of arson, leading to theories that the children had been taken by the Sicilian mafia, perhaps in retaliation for George's outspoken criticism of the fascist government of his native Italy. George died in 1969 after years spent traveling the country chasing leads, handing out flyers, and hiring detectives. Jenny wore black every day after the fire until her death in 1989, a private mourning for her missing children, and she always maintained her conviction that the children survived. Their 5 remaining children continued the search, erecting a massive billboard on the side of Route 16 in Fayetteville, with photos of the missing children in bold letters asking, what was their fate? Kidnapped? Murdered? The mystery of the Sodder children. This billboard became a symbol of the family's unwavering determination to find answers, and it stood beside the road for over 40 years. State and federal efforts to investigate the case further in the early 1950s yielded no new information. The youngest of the surviving Sodder children, Sylvia, along with the Sodders' grandchildren, continued to publicize the case into the 21st century, both in the media and online. Sylvia herself died in 2021. The case remains technically unsolved, with no crime officially recorded. Just a fire and a void where 5 children should have been. What makes this mystery particularly compelling is not just its shocking nature, but the profound silence at its core. It represents more than a potential crime. It's a story about parents who refuse to accept convenient explanations and a family forever marked by uncertainty rather than closure. The disappearance of the Sodder children continues to captivate true crime enthusiasts and historians, not just for its mysterious circumstances, but for what it represents: the devastating impact of uncertainty and the lengths to which a family will go in search of the truth. After 8 decades, the questions remain. Were the children victims of a tragic accident, or was there a more sinister plot at work? The absence of remains, the strange coincidences, and the reported sightings all suggest possibilities that have never been fully explained. The case stands as a testament to the enduring power of unsolved mysteries and the human need for answers in the face of inexplicable loss. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Echoes of the Unknown. If you found this story compelling, please don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share with fellow mystery lovers. Until next time, stay safe, stay hopeful, and remember, the past still whispers if you know how to listen.